"Mom, have you been enjoying the apartment I bought you?" Daniel asked with a proud smile on Eleanor Whitmore's 72nd birthday, and the fork in her hand froze midair because she had no idea what apartment he was talking about. The dining room of her small rented duplex in Plano felt suddenly too quiet, the soft hum of the air conditioner louder than the gentle jazz playing from her old radio, and the single candle on her modest grocery store cake flickered as if it too had heard something it shouldn't have. Daniel stood at the head of the table in a tailored navy blazer that probably cost more than Eleanor's monthly rent of $900, his watch catching the light from the overhead fixture, while Vanessa hovered beside him with a polite, carefully measured smile. Eleanor blinked once, then twice, certain she had misheard him. "The apartment," Daniel repeated lightly, as if reminding her of a gift she had already thanked him for, "the condo downtown. I had it transferred to your name last year. I've been sending $2,000 a month for maintenance and expenses." $2,000 a month. The number echoed in Eleanor's mind, louder than the jazz, louder than the hum of the air conditioner. For the past 18 months, she had been splitting her blood pressure pills in half to make the prescription last longer, driving her 12-year-old Buick without air conditioning through Texas summers that climbed past 100 degrees, and stretching a single pot roast into 3 dinners. She had told herself she was proud of Daniel, proud of the tech company he built in Austin, proud of the $3 million home he and Vanessa recently purchased with its infinity pool and polished stone floors. She had never once asked him for help, and yet he was standing in her rented dining room telling her he had been supporting her with money she had never seen and property she had never stepped inside. Eleanor set her fork down carefully on the porcelain plate she had owned for over 30 years, her movements steady, deliberate. "Daniel," she said, her voice calm, almost gentle, "I don't know what apartment you mean." The smile on his face faltered just slightly, confusion replacing pride. Vanessa's hand tightened around the stem of her wine glass, the faintest shift in posture that might have gone unnoticed by anyone who wasn't looking for it. Daniel laughed once, uncertain. "Mom, don't tell me you forgot. The Lakewood condo. 1 bedroom, balcony view. I wanted you closer to the city. My assistant handled the paperwork. Vanessa made sure everything was sent to you." Eleanor felt the room tilt, not from anger but from a slow, spreading realization that something had been moving quietly around her for a very long time. Paperwork. Sent to her. She pictured her narrow mailbox at the edge of the driveway, the occasional bank statement, the grocery coupons, the electric bill she paid each month by hand. No deed. No keys. No bank deposits of $2,000. Only the same careful budgeting she had done since her husband Harold passed away 3 years ago. She folded her hands together on the table, her wedding ring catching the candlelight, and looked at her son with a softness that masked the sharp clarity forming behind her eyes. "Daniel," she said slowly, "I have never received a deed, a key, or a single dollar from any condo." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Daniel's brows knit together, his confidence cracking. Vanessa's smile remained, but it no longer reached her eyes. And for the first time in many years, Eleanor Whitmore felt something shift inside her. Not panic, not despair, but a quiet, steady determination to find out exactly where her birthday gift had gone. Daniel did not argue that night. He left with a crease between his brows and a promise to call his assistant first thing in the morning, while Vanessa offered Eleanor a brief, careful hug that felt more like a formality than affection. When the door closed and the sound of their luxury sedan faded down the quiet suburban street, Eleanor remained seated at the dining table long after the candle had burned out completely. The cake sat untouched. The paper plates were still stacked neatly on the counter. She did not cry. Instead, she rose slowly, carried her plate to the sink, and began washing dishes by hand, even though there were only 3. The routine steadied her breathing. Warm water ran over her fingers, and she stared at the small crack in the kitchen tile that Harold had once promised to fix. 18 months. $2,000 a month. That meant $36,000 had supposedly been sent in her name. $36,000 could have replaced the Buick, repaired the roof leak in the hallway, paid for every prescription without hesitation. She dried her hands on a faded dish towel and walked to the narrow desk in the corner of the living room where she kept her bills. The lamp beside it cast a soft yellow glow over neatly stacked envelopes tied with twine. Eleanor had always been organized. She believed that paperwork told the truth even when people did not. She untied the stack and began sorting through bank statements month by month. Rent payments, utility bills, grocery charges that rarely exceeded $100 a week. No deposits beyond her modest Social Security check and the small pension Harold had left her. She opened her online banking account on the old laptop Daniel had given her 5 Christmases ago. The screen took its time loading, and she waited patiently, hands folded. When the transaction history appeared, she scrolled back as far as the system would allow. There were no mysterious transfers, no recurring deposits, nothing close to $2,000. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, not in shock, but in recognition. She remembered Vanessa insisting, more than once, that she should allow her to help manage official mail because important documents could be confusing. She remembered signing a change of address form after Daniel said it would simplify tax reporting. At the time, she had trusted them. They were young. They were busy. She did not want to be difficult. Now, in the quiet of her small duplex, those memories rearranged themselves into something far less innocent. She reached for her file cabinet and pulled out a manila folder labeled Property and Legal. Inside were copies of Harold's will, insurance policies, and a business card from an attorney who had handled their estate planning years ago. She ran her thumb over the raised ink of the name and felt a steady calm settle over her. If a condo existed in her name, there would be a record. If money had been transferred on her behalf, there would be a trail. Eleanor closed the laptop gently and turned off the lamp. The house was silent except for the ticking of the wall clock. She did not feel angry. She felt alert. And for the first time since Harold passed away, she understood that being quiet did not mean being unaware. The next morning Eleanor woke before sunrise, not out of anxiety but habit, and brewed a small pot of coffee the way Harold had liked it, strong and steady. She carried her mug to the kitchen table and opened the manila folder again, laying each document out in precise alignment. Outside, a delivery truck rumbled past, and somewhere down the street a lawn sprinkler clicked on, ordinary sounds of a quiet Texas morning. Eleanor dialed the number on the old attorney's business card, half expecting it to be disconnected after so many years, but a calm receptionist answered and informed her that Mr. Thomas Avery was still practicing estate and property law in Dallas. She requested an appointment and accepted the earliest available time, which was Thursday at 10 o'clock in the morning. She did not mention her son. She did not mention a condo. She simply said she needed to verify a property record under her name. After hanging up, she returned to her laptop and searched county property records online. The website was slow, requiring exact spelling and patient navigation. She typed her full legal name, Eleanor Grace Whitmore, and waited. One property appeared, her current rental address, listed only for reference. Then she adjusted the search to include properties transferred within the last 2 years. This time, another entry surfaced. A condominium unit in the Lakewood district of Dallas. 1 bedroom, 850 square feet. Estimated market value, $420,000. The owner of record was listed as Eleanor G. Whitmore. Her hands remained steady on the keyboard. She clicked into the details. The mailing address associated with the property was not her Plano duplex. It was Daniel and Vanessa's home in Austin. Eleanor leaned back slowly in her chair, the pieces settling into place with quiet precision. If official documents had been redirected to Austin, she would never have seen them. If monthly transfers were routed through an account she did not control, she would never have known. Her phone buzzed softly on the table. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. She let it ring twice before answering. His voice sounded strained, confused. He explained that his assistant confirmed the purchase, confirmed the transfers, confirmed that everything had been set up correctly. Vanessa had handled coordination because Daniel had been traveling frequently at the time. Eleanor listened without interruption. When he finished, she spoke evenly. She asked him for copies of every transfer confirmation, every email regarding the purchase, and the name of the bank account receiving the maintenance funds. There was a pause on the other end of the line, the kind of pause that follows realization. Daniel promised to send everything by the end of the day. After the call ended, Eleanor closed the property record page and folded her hands in her lap. She did not feel betrayed yet. She felt informed. There was a difference. And information, she knew, was far more powerful than accusation. By late afternoon, Daniel forwarded the documents he had promised, each file labeled carefully, each transfer confirmation stamped with dates that stretched back 18 months. Eleanor printed every page, arranging them across her kitchen table in quiet rows. The maintenance payments had indeed been issued regularly, $2,000 on the first of every month, transferred from Daniel's corporate account to a checking account ending in 4972. The account holder name was listed as E.G. Whitmore Property Management. Eleanor read the name twice. She had never opened such an account. She compared the routing number to her own bank statements. It did not match. She reached for the folder containing her personal records and confirmed it again. Different bank, different branch, different city. The mailing address tied to that account, according to the attached documentation, was the Austin residence Daniel shared with Vanessa. Eleanor did not allow herself to assume anything yet. Instead, she pulled out a legal pad and began writing a timeline. Date of property purchase, date of title transfer, date of bank account creation, date of first deposit. Each event aligned closely within the same 2-week window, a period when Daniel had been overseas negotiating a merger, something he had spoken about proudly during Sunday phone calls. Vanessa, he had mentioned at the time, was helping manage personal matters while he traveled. Eleanor remembered those calls now with sharper clarity. Vanessa had once joked that paperwork was exhausting and that elderly relatives should never have to deal with it. Eleanor had laughed politely then. She did not laugh now. The sun dipped lower outside her kitchen window, casting long shadows across the table where the evidence lay in neat stacks. Her phone buzzed again. A text message from Daniel. Read that he was confused by the bank account details and that he had asked Vanessa for clarification. A second message followed minutes later, shorter this time. He wrote that Vanessa said the account was created only to streamline tax reporting and that Eleanor must have forgotten signing authorization forms. Eleanor studied the printed signature on the account authorization page Daniel had included. It resembled her name, but the handwriting was slightly heavier, the loop on the capital E tighter than her natural stroke. She stood slowly and walked to her desk, where she kept older documents bearing her authentic signature. She placed one beside the printed form and examined them carefully. The difference was subtle, but it was there. She felt no surge of outrage, only a steady tightening of resolve. Eleanor returned to the kitchen table, folded the questionable document in half, and slipped it into the manila folder. Thursday's appointment with Mr. Avery suddenly felt less like a precaution and more like a necessity. Outside, the evening air cooled, and the streetlights flickered on one by one. Inside her modest duplex, Eleanor Whitmore sat calmly among the papers that told a story no one had intended for her to read. Thursday arrived with a clear sky and a steady breeze that moved gently through the oak trees lining the street outside Eleanor's duplex. She dressed carefully in a light gray cardigan and navy slacks, clothing that felt both comfortable and deliberate. She carried the manila folder tucked neatly inside her leather tote, the same bag she had used for church services and doctor appointments for years. The drive to Dallas took just under 40 minutes, and she kept the radio off, preferring the quiet hum of the highway to any distraction. When she arrived at Mr. Avery's office, a modest brick building near downtown, she noticed the familiarity of it all, the muted carpet, the framed certificates on the walls, the scent of brewed coffee in the reception area. Mr. Avery greeted her with the same steady handshake he had offered her and Harold years ago, his expression attentive but not surprised. Eleanor explained everything without emotion, laying out the documents one by one across his polished desk. The property record, the redirected mailing address, the bank transfers, the questionable signature. Mr. Avery listened without interrupting, occasionally adjusting his glasses to study a page more closely. When she finished, he leaned back slightly and folded his hands. He confirmed that the condominium was legally titled in her name, but the management account receiving the funds was separate and had been established with authorization that appeared to grant limited control to a secondary party. He did not speculate, and neither did she. He simply stated that if the signature was not hers, that would require further verification. He recommended a formal review of the account setup, including signature comparison and banking records. Eleanor nodded once. She asked what steps were necessary to ensure that any property under her name was fully controlled by her and her alone. Mr. Avery outlined a clear process, including notifying the bank in writing, requesting a freeze on the disputed account, and issuing a certified letter to all parties involved. Eleanor agreed to proceed. She signed the engagement paperwork with her own deliberate handwriting, pressing the pen firmly against the page. There was no tremor in her hand. As she left the office, she stepped into the late morning sunlight and felt something shift inside her again, not anger, but clarity. Her phone vibrated in her purse. A message from Daniel appeared, asking if they could meet in person that evening because Vanessa had become unusually quiet after their earlier discussion. Eleanor read the message twice before responding that she would be available. She did not accuse. She did not reveal her appointment. She simply stated the time and location, a small cafe halfway between Plano and Austin where they had once celebrated Daniel's first promotion. When she placed her phone back in her bag, she understood that the conversation ahead would not be about money alone. It would be about trust, and trust, once examined, could not be redirected like a piece of mail. The cafe was quiet when Eleanor arrived that evening, the soft glow of pendant lights reflecting against the polished wood tables and the faint aroma of roasted coffee lingering in the air. She chose a small table near the window, setting her leather tote beside her chair with the same measured calm she had carried all week. Daniel entered first, his expression strained, his usual confidence replaced with visible uncertainty. Vanessa followed a step behind him, her posture composed but her eyes sharper than usual, scanning the room before settling on Eleanor. They exchanged brief greetings and sat down. No one ordered food. Daniel spoke first, explaining that he had reviewed the documents again and could not understand how the management account had been structured without his direct oversight. He insisted that he trusted Vanessa completely at the time, that she had volunteered to handle administrative details while he traveled. Vanessa nodded, her voice steady as she explained that the account had been created temporarily for tax efficiency and that all funds were intended for Eleanor's benefit. Eleanor listened without interrupting, her hands folded neatly on the table. When Vanessa finished, Eleanor asked a single question. She asked why the mailing address for the condominium and the management account had been listed as Daniel and Vanessa's Austin residence instead of her Plano duplex. There was a pause that stretched longer than the others. Vanessa answered that it had seemed simpler to centralize documentation, especially since Eleanor was not comfortable with digital banking. Daniel glanced between them, the weight of the silence settling over the table. Eleanor then removed a thin stack of printed pages from her tote and placed them gently on the table. They were copies of the property record and the bank account authorization form. She did not accuse. She simply asked Vanessa to look at the signature carefully and confirm whether she believed it matched Eleanor's natural handwriting. Vanessa's gaze dropped to the paper. Her composure did not break, but her fingers tightened slightly along the edge of the document. Daniel leaned forward, studying the signature more closely than he had before. Eleanor remained calm, her voice even when she explained that she had already initiated a formal review of the account with legal counsel to clarify ownership and control. The word counsel shifted the air between them. Daniel's expression changed from confusion to realization, as though a door had quietly closed behind him. Vanessa began to speak again, offering explanations about misunderstandings and administrative oversights, but her tone no longer carried the same certainty. Eleanor did not raise her voice. She did not threaten. She simply stated that any funds intended for her would be redirected into an account solely under her control and that all official correspondence would be corrected immediately. Outside the cafe window, headlights passed in steady streams along the highway. Inside, the truth did not erupt. It settled, heavy and undeniable, across the small wooden table where three people sat, and understood that trust, once examined under proper light, rarely looks the way it did from a distance. After the meeting at the cafe, Daniel insisted on driving his mother back to her duplex, leaving Vanessa to follow in their own car. The ride north was unusually quiet, the glow of dashboard lights reflecting against Daniel's tense expression. He spoke in fragments, trying to reconcile the image he had carried of his careful financial planning with the documents now spread across Eleanor's kitchen table. He admitted that during the months of international travel he had signed electronic approvals without reviewing every attachment, trusting that the details were being handled responsibly. Eleanor listened, her gaze steady on the passing highway signs, offering no accusation and no comfort beyond her presence. When they arrived at her driveway, Daniel turned off the engine but did not move to exit. He said that he never intended for her to struggle, that the condo had been his way of honoring everything she had sacrificed while he built his company. Eleanor nodded slowly and replied that intention without verification is only half a promise. The words were not sharp, but they landed with weight. Inside her duplex, she placed the folder back on the desk and began drafting a written request to the bank, her handwriting firm and unmistakable. She requested immediate suspension of all third-party control over the property management account and demanded a full transaction history from the date of its creation. She included copies of her authentic signature for comparison. The next morning, she mailed the certified letter and notified Mr. Avery that the formal review should proceed without delay. By midweek, Daniel called again, his voice more subdued than before. He explained that he had confronted Vanessa privately and that she had described the arrangement as temporary, claiming she intended to consolidate funds for tax reporting before transferring them fully. Eleanor did not challenge the explanation. She simply asked Daniel whether he had ever personally verified the balance of that account. There was another pause. He admitted that he had not. That afternoon, Eleanor received confirmation from the bank that the disputed account had been frozen pending investigation. She set the letter down on her kitchen counter and exhaled slowly. Outside, children rode bicycles along the sidewalk, their laughter carrying faintly through the open window. Ordinary life continued, steady and indifferent. Eleanor prepared a simple dinner of grilled chicken and steamed vegetables, moving through her kitchen with the same deliberate rhythm she had practiced for decades. She did not feel victorious. She felt aligned. Later that evening, Daniel arrived alone. He looked older than he had just days before, as though clarity had aged him. He told his mother that he had requested independent access to every corporate and personal account under his name, and that he intended to untangle each one carefully. Eleanor listened, then placed a cup of tea in front of him. She told him that money can be replaced, but misplaced trust requires examination, not anger. In the quiet space of her modest living room, the power dynamic had shifted without raised voices or dramatic gestures. It had shifted because facts had replaced assumptions, and Eleanor Whitmore had chosen to face them directly rather than look away. By the end of the week, the bank completed its preliminary review and confirmed that the management account had been opened with dual administrative access, listing Eleanor as primary owner and Vanessa as authorized manager with full transfer privileges. The freeze prevented further withdrawals, but the transaction history revealed that a significant portion of the monthly deposits had been redirected into an investment account under Vanessa's name, labeled as short-term allocation. Eleanor read the printed statement without visible reaction. The numbers were precise. The pattern was consistent. Funds intended for maintenance and living expenses had never reached her personal accounts. Daniel arrived that afternoon carrying his own stack of documents, his movements sharper than usual, as though each step carried a decision already made. He explained that he had reviewed the investment account and discovered transfers that did not align with the purpose he had described when purchasing the condominium. Vanessa had described the activity as temporary reallocation to maximize returns, but she had not informed him that the funds remained outside Eleanor's control for over a year. Eleanor listened, her expression steady, and asked him only one question. She asked whether he believed transparency had been present from the beginning. Daniel did not answer immediately. Instead, he lowered his gaze and admitted that he had trusted convenience over verification. That evening, Vanessa requested to meet at the duplex, and Eleanor agreed. When Vanessa arrived, her composure remained intact, but her explanations carried less certainty than before. She described strategic management, tax positioning, and delayed transfers as prudent financial decisions made on Eleanor's behalf. Eleanor allowed her to finish without interruption. Then she placed the bank's written confirmation on the coffee table between them. The document stated clearly that the management account would revert to sole control of Eleanor Whitmore within 5 business days, and that all redirected funds would be restored to the primary account, pending final reconciliation. The language was formal, unemotional, and final. Vanessa's voice softened as she acknowledged that she should have communicated more clearly. Daniel stood quietly behind his mother's armchair, no longer defensive, no longer uncertain. Eleanor rose slowly and walked to the window, looking out at the street where porch lights flickered on one by one. She spoke calmly, explaining that financial skill does not replace ethical clarity and that generosity cannot function without honesty. She did not accuse Vanessa of theft. She did not raise her tone. She simply stated that every dollar intended for her would be accounted for, and that the condominium would be managed solely under her direction moving forward. The room remained silent after she finished. In that silence, the imbalance that had lingered for months dissolved without spectacle. Facts had replaced narrative, and authority had returned to its rightful place, not through confrontation, but through steady insistence on truth. 5 business days later, the bank confirmed in writing that full control of the condominium account had been restored exclusively to Eleanor Whitmore, and that the redirected funds had been transferred back with detailed accounting attached. The final balance reflected every monthly deposit Daniel had sent, plus modest interest from the temporary investments. Eleanor reviewed the statement at her kitchen table early that morning, sunlight filtering through the thin curtains and landing across the neatly aligned pages. She did not smile. She simply nodded once, as though acknowledging the completion of a long arithmetic problem. Later that afternoon, she drove to the Lakewood condominium for the first time. The building rose quietly above a row of maple trees, its brick exterior clean and understated. She parked in the designated space listed under her name and stepped into the lobby with calm curiosity. The unit itself was modest but bright, 850 square feet with a small balcony overlooking a stretch of green space. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating hardwood floors and an untouched kitchen counter. It was not extravagant. It was practical. She walked slowly from room to room, imagining fresh curtains, a small writing desk near the window, perhaps a potted fern on the balcony. This space had been intended as a gesture of gratitude. It had simply lost its clarity along the way. Daniel arrived shortly after, his expression thoughtful rather than triumphant. He apologized without defensiveness, acknowledging that his desire to provide comfort had been overshadowed by inattention. Eleanor listened, then placed the keys in his palm briefly before closing his fingers around them. She told him that generosity must travel directly from intention to recipient without detours. He understood. When Vanessa joined them later, the conversation remained measured. Vanessa acknowledged poor judgment and miscommunication, her tone stripped of earlier confidence. Eleanor did not humiliate her. She did not lecture. She stated plainly that access without transparency erodes trust, and that trust requires maintenance just as property does. Over the following weeks, Eleanor arranged for a property manager of her own choosing and scheduled movers to transfer only what she truly needed. She kept her duplex for the remainder of the lease, unwilling to rush change simply because circumstances had shifted. On the evening she spent her first night in the condominium, she stood alone on the balcony, looking out at the quiet Dallas skyline glowing in the distance. The air was cooler there, lighter somehow. She did not feel rescued. She felt respected. The difference mattered. In the steady rhythm of her own decision-making, Eleanor Whitmore reclaimed not only a property, but the authority over her life that had quietly been redirected without her knowledge. And in that quiet reclamation, she discovered that dignity, once asserted calmly and clearly, does not require applause to remain intact.